So round 5 of the South American World Cup qualifiers is not far away, so I'm going to preview and predict all 5 of the games. But before we get into the predictions, let's take a look at how the table looks after 4 games. So how it works is the top 6 qualify automatically for the World Cup and 7th place go on to the Interconfederation playoffs. And keep in mind that Ecuador started on -3 points, hence why they've won 2 games but set on 4 points. But Argentina top the standings, followed by Uruguay and Brazil, then at the bottom Bolivia, Peru and Chile all sit outside the top 7. Now first up we've got Brazil versus Colombia, 3rd versus 5th. Now it's been a shaky start to qualifying for Brazil. They sit on 7 points and in the last international window they started off by drawing 1-1 at home to Venezuela, then followed that result up with a 2-0 loss away to Uruguay to give Brazil their first defeat in Conmebol World Cup qualifying since 2015. And we're so used to Brazil destroying teams in qualifying and finishing top that by their usual standards this hasn't been a good start. Going forwards it's just not clicking for Brazil. They look disjointed and they don't look like they have an idea of how they want to move the ball. Against Uruguay they didn't have a single shot on target for the whole game, and to rub further salt into the wounds, Neymar went off injured and will be out for at least 6 months, maybe even longer. Defensively, both Gabriel and Marquinhos were dominated by Darwin Núñez and both made individual errors, switching off at vital times. Now obviously Brazil are going to qualify, but they need to improve, otherwise this general malaise that currently sits around the national team will continue to fester. And as for their opponents, Colombia, they are unbeaten so far with 1 win and 3 draws. In the last window they drew 2-2 against Uruguay, which was a game that they really should have won. They wasted so many chances and really should have put the game to bed, but then they gave away a penalty in the 91st minute to draw the game. Then they got a 0-0 draw against Ecuador, which could have gone either way, but Colombia had a lot of injuries, particularly in defence, with 3rd or 4th choice players having to come in, so I don't think they'll be disappointed so far. A big positive for them was how well James Rodriguez has played, and even though he's lost a lot of pace, his technical ability is still there and shows he can still be an important player on his day. In terms of my prediction, I can see this finishing a 1-1 draw. Now next up we've got Argentina versus Uruguay. The defending world champions have gotten off to a perfect start so far, winning all 4 games. In the last window they got a 1-0 win against Paraguay, but really it should have been way more than 1 goal. Argentina were brilliant and everything was perfect apart from the finishing. Messi didn't start the game, but he did come off the bench in the second half, but the pairing of Julian Alvarez and Lautaro Martinez gives Argentina hope that there's life after Messi, because the way Alvarez and Martinez linked up was superb. Then in the second game, Argentina beat Peru 2-0, and Lionel Messi showed that he's not finished yet, scoring both goals. He looks so sharp and he's got such a great collective team around him that whilst the 2026 World Cup might be a bit of a stretch as he will be 39 by then, the Copa America next year is absolutely doable because he looked better than ever in this game. As for Uruguay, they are riding high from their historic victory against Brazil, 2-0 winners to put them second in the table behind Argentina. That's the first time they've beaten Brazil since 2001, and they've got such a talented team mixed with the magic of coach Marcelo Bielsa. And when you look at the spine of this team, they've got Araujo at the back, Ugarte and Valverde in midfield, Darwin Núñez up front. That by the time the 2026 World Cup comes around, I think the top teams are really going to struggle against them. And Núñez was the big standout in the 2 games in the last window, and what struck me is how much his hold-up play has improved and his link-up play was exquisite. He just needs to work on his finishing really, but with Klopp and Bielsa coaching him, he's got every chance to go on and be world-class. As for my prediction, I think Uruguay will give Argentina a good game, but I can only see Argentina winning this. I'm going for a 2-0 win. Next up, it's Venezuela versus Ecuador, and what a start to qualifying for Venezuela. They sit 4th, level on points with Brazil, and there's every chance that they could qualify for their first ever Senior World Cup. In the last window, they started off with a huge 1-1 draw away at Brazil, then followed that up with an impressive 3-0 victory over Chile, and it's just crazy how much they've improved. And the star of the game was the winger, Jefferson Soteldo, who plays for Santos in Brazil, and Chile just could not deal with him. He was tearing the Chile defence apart down the left wing, and he scored and also got 2 assists and a stunning performance. Then on top of that, they also look very solid defensively, so everything is looking good for Venezuela right now. As for Ecuador, they started the campaign on -3 points, so despite 2 wins to their name, they are currently on 4 points. In the last international window, they started off with a 2-1 victory over Bolivia, but it really wasn't a good performance. I don't know whether it was the altitude, as they looked really tired, but sometimes you have to win whilst not playing at your best. 16-year-old Kendry Paez was brilliant in the first half, and he's a real gem of a player, and to be getting regular senior games at the age of 16 shows that he's going to be a star for Ecuador for the next 20 years. And in the second game they drew 0-0 against Colombia, which was a game that could have gone either way really, but Ecuador fans have been very critical of goalkeeper Moises Ramirez, and after the Bolivia game there were huge cries for him to be dropped, but the manager stuck with him and he saved a penalty against Colombia and had a really good game. He looked like a completely different keeper, so hopefully he can kick on. Enner Valencia had 2 really poor games. His movement was good and he was still getting into positions for the chances, but his shooting was awful, and many Ecuador fans are wondering whether he is finished and if it's time to move on from him. As for my prediction, I think these are 2 pretty evenly matched sides, and I can see them cancelling each other out, so I'm going for a 0-0 draw. Now moving on to Bolivia versus Peru, it's been a terrible start to qualifying for Bolivia. For the first time in their history, they've lost all 4 of their first qualifying games. In the last window, it was a 2-1 defeat against Ecuador and a 1-0 defeat against Paraguay. They sit bottom of the table, but at least they were competitive in both games and didn't get battered. But on the other hand, against Paraguay, they didn't really threaten to score, and Bolivia have always been one of the worst sides in Conmebol, but this time they look worse than ever, and it's hard to even see them getting 10 points with this form. They are very reliant on their home performances, since they haven't won an away World Cup qualifier since 1993, but if they aren't even playing well at home, then they really haven't got anything. But thankfully for Bolivia, if they are going to get points, this game at home to Peru is their best chance of doing so. It's been a really poor start to qualifying for Peru. They sit 9th on 1 point and they haven't scored a single goal in any of the 4 games yet. In fact, in 4 games, Peru haven't had a single shot on target yet, which is just crazy. The coach, Juan Reynoso, just isn't the man to take Peru forward. He's a very defensive-minded coach, but the issue is that Peru are terrible in defence. The strength has always been in attack, but Reynoso doesn't seem to set them up to attack, and not to have a single shot on target in 4 games is actually impressive. When Guerreiro was in charge, at least Peru had an identity and a strategy, but this current team looks so toothless and really poor. As for my prediction, these are 2 low-scoring sides. The altitude is always an advantage for Bolivia when playing at home, and if they are going to win a game, it will surely be this one. But for my prediction, I'm going for a 1-1 draw. And finally, Chile versus Paraguay. Both sides sit on 4 points with the exact same record of 1 win, 1 draw and 2 losses. And this is a pretty big game because I think these are the 2 sides that are going to be battling it out for that final 7th spot to reach the Interconfederation playoffs. In the last international window, Chile beat Peru 2-0, but then lost to Venezuela 3-0. And I think there's a pretty good chance that Chile won't even qualify for this World Cup. After 10 years of their golden generation, those players have gone way past their prime, and now they have a serious lack of depth in the squad. They haven't got any players coming through that are anywhere near the level of talent that the likes of Vidal and Alexis Sanchez were, so it's going to be a really tough qualifying cycle for them. And they play a Paraguay side who I'd say have shown a bit more promise than what Chile have so far. They do look a bit more solid defensively, and they've only conceded 2 goals so far, but in the last international window it was a 1-0 defeat against Argentina, where they were completely outplayed, but then they finally got their first win of the qualifying campaign, beating Bolivia 1-0. They had 2 disallowed goals and dominated the game, with Torino forward Antonio Sanibra scoring the winner. As for my prediction, I'm going to go for a narrow 1-0 Paraguay win. I think that going forward, they've got a bit more about them, with the likes of Miguel Almiron and Kaku in attack.